there's just like a certain kind of noise this stadium makes when Serena walks onto the court. I hadn't heard it in 4 years. I really missed it. Hearing it again was terrific.
She is the GOAT, as I talked to her about on this podcast, actually, just about a year or so ago at this point. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Yes, in fact, today on the show, we are talking about Serena and Venus Williams because they are back at the U.S. Open. Venus is playing doubles and singles. Serena is playing doubles. We're also going to be watching Coco Gauff. I mean, could she take the whole thing for the women's? And then Carlos Alcaraz, he's coming back with an injury, a wrist injury. And then there's all this new talent to watch. So we're talking about that today on the podcast, a little preview of the U.S. Open. Plus, the question of sports and politics. So the sports betting industry is the third largest corporate donor in the midterm elections. And they are spending millions of dollars in Georgia, $12 million to be exact, which in the state of Georgia is a lot of money. So I'm talking to Greg Bluestein, who is the chief political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And walking us through how this spending and how this industry is shaping the elections there. Up first, though. So today marks 6 months since the U.S. and Israel carried out strikes inside of Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and sparking this cascading conflict in the region. Now, President Trump posted an 8-minute video to Truth Social at the time explaining his objective.
And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. It's a very simple message. They will never have a nuclear weapon.
The U.S. and Israel did bomb Iran's nuclear facilities and significantly damage them. But then Iran pushed back. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. They choked off this key shipping route and rattled global markets. Months later, that is still mostly true. By now, the U.S. is facing a weapon shortage, and the human consequences of the war have been dire. The UN estimates that thousands of Iranian civilians have been killed. 18 American service members have also been killed, and hundreds wounded. President Trump has repeatedly claimed victory or said that peace is right around the corner. Iran flatly denying that. No deal has come to fruition. So today, I want to take a look at where we are in this conflict and what could come next. So for that, I want to bring in NBC News contributor, Hooman Majd. Hi, Hooman.
Thanks, Yasmin.
Okay, so I just kind of played for you the president's objective in announcing the launch on Iran, which is to ensure that Iran does not have the ability to develop nuclear weapons. And that is, by the way, in addition to after the 12-day war last summer, in which the president at the time had said the U.S. had completely destroyed Iran's nuclear capabilities. Is the U.S. any closer to having achieved the objective set forth by the president at the beginning of this war?
No, I'd say he's probably further away from it. I mean, let's remember, like as you pointed out, that in June of last year, 2025, when the U.S. bombed the two major facilities in Iran, nuclear facilities, burying under thousands of tons of rubble what stockpile Iran had of nuclear material, and destroying the centrifuges and destroying everything else, apart from saying that it was totally obliterated, President Trump's words, that the nuclear program had been totally obliterated. He also pointed out subsequently in many different media appearances that, and if Iran ever tries to do anything with those facilities, we'll bomb them again. So the idea was that Iran really couldn't do anything with its nuclear program at that point, which is why negotiations started to happen between the United States and Iran. It was happening actually during February, during the end of February, the last week of February, when the U.S., in the middle of those negotiations, went back and started this war. There appears to have been a number of rationale points about this. One has been, yes, we got to end the nuclear program, which is an easy one for the president to say because that's something Americans understand. The second one was got to get rid of their ballistic missiles because they can reach, all these countries and our allies in the region. That's less obvious for most Americans. It doesn't really touch them. Nuclear is something that does touch a lot of Americans, the fear of a nuclear attack somewhere in the world, which could be devastating to the entire planet. But then the third one was regime change. But if the goal is still, and I think President Trump still says it, is to stop Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. We are further away from that because Iran now has an incentive, much stronger incentive, to go and build a nuclear weapon and go nuclear, weaponize its nuclear program than it did prior to January or
Right,
February.
because there was already a major lack of trust between Iran and the United States. But any trust that actually existed between the two countries has essentially just fallen away completely.
Just gone away, absolutely. And then you have to remember, I mean, even as recently as this week, with President Trump sort of praising North Korea and essentially saying he has all these nuclear weapons, and so which means, hinting that we would never attack a country like North Korea. Well, what message does that send to Iran? Better have a nuclear weapon if you don't want to be attacked. Their version of a nuclear weapon, the Iranian leadership sees this, at least some in the leadership see their version of a nuclear weapon being the Strait of Hormuz.
Also, though, what's interesting, Hooman, is my understanding from my reporting inside the country and the people that I've been speaking to is this is now a military-run government. I mean, the government is being run by the IRGC, in part because you have a supreme leader who knows where he is, what is actually wrong with him. And he had a somewhat of a strong relationship, stronger than I would say his father did with the Revolutionary Guard. And so now it seems as if the Guard is actually who is running the government. So we're now talking about a military state.
Yes. And I think in some ways that would be perfectly okay for the Trump administration, as long as it made a deal with the United States that Trump could accept. But I don't think there's any, anybody who thinks, even in Iran, and I'm sure you've seen the reports too, and the people I speak to and the people that you speak to inside Iran, even some of the people who are very anti-regime and have actually participated in the January protests, have come to realize that even if they thought initially that Trump was going to be their savior by getting rid of the regime in the first few days, even killing the supreme leader and killing some of the top leaders that they held responsible for, having, blood-stained hands, they've come around to the idea, to the understanding in their minds, at least most people in Iran, that Trump is not interested in human rights. He's not interested. He's not interested in what the people of Iran want. And in general, the sense is that the Trump administration, the Minab school killing where over 160 school children died, the infrastructure, blowing up, oil refineries, bridges, stuff like that. These have affected people, electricity shortages, the water in the south of Iran, the water plant that was blown up. These things have affected ordinary citizens who may not have been absolutely pro-regime, and they're not pro-regime now necessarily, but they are certainly not pro-America or pro-war, as even if they ever were.
I think, what's important kind of to end on here, Hooman, is also the fact that this war is not popular with Americans. We have polling from NBC News and other outlets that's showing the approval rating for his war, the president's war with Iran, is hovering between 25 to 35%. That's not good for him. There's midterm elections that are around the corner come November. He doesn't have a lot of runway left when it comes to this war with Iran. How does this end in your estimation, or do you see anything? Do you see an end?
It's hard to predict. It seems like his preference is, the price of gas hasn't gone up. There is some movement through the Strait of Hormuz. China is buying a lot less oil, which is one of the reasons that there isn't this big spike. But we're still talking about $4 for gas for average, and we're talking about $6 now for diesel, which is going to affect groceries for Americans. But I think as you point out, with the November midterms coming, very quickly, I think the preference of the administration is this economic pressure, see what it does, even if the experts are telling him nothing's going to happen with Iran. And then after the midterms, if he's lost both houses of Congress, well, then it doesn't matter. He's going to go ahead and bomb Iran anyway. I mean, it'll be this pattern, I think. It's not going to end easily unless he gets back decides to. And Iran has offered that. It said, if you get back to the MOA, the Memorandum of Understanding, we can work together. We can make this work. The foreign minister has said that. The head of the Supreme National Security Council has said that in Iran. They want the U.S. to abide by the Memorandum of Understanding, and they say that Iran will as well. So whether that's practical or not, or whether Trump has any interest in that or not. I mean, the one thing about President Trump is he has always been able to sell, at least to his base and even to a larger group of Republicans in the GOP, that whatever he's done that has been an obvious failure has actually been a success. So if he can just make the deal with Iran and say we won, that would be ideal.
Hooman Majd, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So this entire month, we're going to take a look at the money in the midterms, and especially the new industries that are getting involved, who they're supporting, how they're doing it, and then what policy outcomes they're actually gunning for. Here is something that might surprise you. So the sports betting industry is the third largest corporate donor in this year's midterm elections, behind tech and crypto, according to Reuters. Now, companies including DraftKings and FanDuel, they've put in at least $72 million so far to the super PAC Win for America. And more than $12 million of that went into state legislative races in the state of Georgia, where sports betting, by the way, is not legal. So why is the sports betting industry getting so involved in Georgia? What is it actually hoping to achieve? For this, I want to bring in someone who has closely covered the sports betting industry's role in the state of Georgia and in politics as well. Greg Bluestein, who is the chief political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and host of the Politically Georgia podcast. Hey, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Okay, so sports betting, it's now legal, right, in 39 states or so. And if you watch pro sports on television, it is hard to escape all the ads for places like DraftKings and FanDuel. But not only is it illegal in Georgia, state lawmakers have actually rejected a bill to legalize it earlier this year. How did the fight over that legislation play out?
Yeah, this has been part of a broader debate in Georgia for decades about whether or not to legalize gambling. The lottery was legalized after an epic fight and helped fund a very popular scholarship called the Hope Scholarship that allowed folks with B averages to go to school tuition free. Like me, I was a Hope Scholar. But a part of it that never went forward was, of course, the broader gambling. Casino gambling is still outlawed in Georgia, and sports betting is still outlawed in Georgia. And sometimes they're taken as a whole fight. Sometimes they're taken as separate fights. But this past year, after basically a decade of intense debate, a sports betting bill finally reached a vote in the Georgia House. It was the first time it's ever reached a vote in the Georgia House, and it went down in flames. It needed 121 plus votes, and it only got about half that.
So after this thing failed, right back in March, Win for America was like, no, we're still going to funnel a bunch of money. They're then pouring $12 million or so into 2 Georgia political committees. What did their strategy at the time look like? And were they putting out ads focusing on sports betting?
Yeah, it's really interesting because $12 million spent on Georgia legislative races is a huge amount. And we did a review and analysis that showed of the 34 different races where they played a part in, 32 of the candidates won. So that gives you a sense of just how that money...
The influence potentially.
Yeah, look, because even if you're not advertising whatsoever on sports betting, just getting a name out there is important, right? Just getting the candidate's name. We talked to one candidate, Lanny Thomas, who said he didn't even have a position on sports betting yet. He's like, I don't even know why these interests got involved in my race. I haven't even researched that issue yet. So that just gives you an idea of just how they're throwing their money around. But was it a huge, is it one of those litmus test debates in Georgia politics right now? No. I mean, abortion, guns, social issues, transgender bathrooms, those are coming up.
Right. Like voters aren't going to the polls thinking about sports betting.
Not at all.
Was there a specific type of candidate that these PACs were supporting?
And look, you saw it across the board. There are some candidates who are scratching their heads over, why a couple $100,000 is going into either boost their campaigns or tear down the other guy. There are some that have been very vocal in their support for sports betting. And then there are some, who, at least one lawmaker who opposed the sports betting vote in the Georgia House was defeated in her primary by a landslide after she came out against it. Again, though, even in that race, sports betting was not the key difference. It was more about her being available, her constituent relations.
You mentioned this kind of briefly, you touched on it briefly, but I do think it's an important thing to talk a little bit more about, which is like voters. Like, is it, yes, maybe it's not something like top of mind, top three, the economy, immigration, national security, whatever your thing is going to the polls. But like, is sports betting at all resonating with Georgia voters?
Yeah, for a long time, it's been kind of predictable. Democrats tend to support broader gambling initiatives, especially if they go into education or other, public service funding, and Republicans have tended to oppose it. But then we reached this sort of watershed moment about a decade ago. There's these kind of ballot referendum test questions on Republican and Democratic ballots, and Republicans were asked whether or not they supported casino gambling as long as the money went into some sort of cause, some sort of public cause, and a narrow majority said yes. So that to me was this big moment. The divide now is not clean. There'll be voters who overall support expanding gambling or sports betting. But when it gets to where that money is spent, there still is a pretty sharp divide. There's some who say, as long as it goes in the general fund for some sort of good cause, they're okay with it. And then there are some who say, look, it should be used specifically for law enforcement or specifically for needs-based scholarships for higher education or for pre-K funding, or you name it. So that's where the rubber meets the road in the Georgia legislature.
This isn't just happening in Georgia, by the way. I know, for instance, it's happening in Pennsylvania, right? You've got investments happening in legislative moves when it comes to sports betting. How are you watching this come November writ large? Do you think there's incentives for them to continue to invest in the general?
I do, because, even though it got wiped out in the Georgia House, it still got a vote, which was something. So now the sports betting interests know where they need to do work and who they already have in their corner. And that's not easy, because you know that even in these sort of caucus meetings, a lawmaker could tell you one thing, but do another thing in an actual vote. So this issue is still not dead. And I mean, we've written this story so many times, like all bets are off, or you name the pun, on sports betting. But there's when you have $12 billion plus of spending in Georgia, mostly legislative races, that shows you the extent of the powers that be and how much they're going to fight for this next year. And next year, Georgia's going to have a new governor. Rick Jackson, the Republican nominee, he hasn't said much about where he stands on sports betting. I actually texted his folks before this just to see if there's an update, and there's not really a clear honed out position that we've seen. Keisha Lance Bottoms, the Democratic nominee, has been more open to it. But if a incoming new governor who supports this idea puts his or her capital behind it, then you better believe it'll at least get some traction. Now, getting from 63 or so House votes to 121, because that would be a constitutional amendment. You need to get 2/3 of the 180 member Georgia House to vote for it. So that's a long road to haul. That is a very uphill battle to almost double the amount of votes that you got in the last round. So next year could be the year. But listen, we've also been saying for years that this sports betting folks think this is the year.
Greg Bluestein, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So speaking of sports, the U.S. Open is kicking off this Sunday at the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center in New York City. It's the final Grand Slam of the tennis season, so there has been a lot of anticipation. Can Carlos Alcaraz come back from injury to defend his title? Can America's sweetheart Coco Gauff continue her hot streak? And will this year's honeydew sales surpass last year's record 738,000 plus drinks consumed, some of which, by the way, I consumed myself? So for this, from the U.S. Open, I'm going to bring in Matthew Futterman. He is a senior tennis writer at The Athletic. You are currently in the media center at the U.S. Open, actually where they serve the food. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, how are you? Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I assume you're not drinking on the job like I did and trying out some of those honeydeuces either.
Yeah, no, I'm not a huge honeydews guy.
So it's been an unpredictable year in tennis, especially when it comes to the men. So it's the third Grand Slam tournament without this rivalry of Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner. Sinner pulled out with an injury just as Alcaraz is coming back after being off the court for months. Does this kind of, Matt, level the playing field for the men's draw?
I think it certainly does. I mean, having said that, Carlos Alcaraz is Carlos Alcaraz, and he could come alive and win the tournament because he's that sort of special and magical player. But having said that, he hasn't played in 4 months. He's got the worst injury a tennis player can possibly have because, it's his wrist, and you just can't hide that injury. So I think that is something that makes this U.S. Open, this men's draw, completely mysterious. The other great player in the draw, of course, is Novak Djokovic, but he's 39. You have a situation where all of the greatest players in the men's draw all have sort of like an asterisk or a but after them. You talk about other players who could contend. Ben Shelton, he's never done it before. Arthur Ashe, he's had a bad back. There's lots of exciting players out there. Probably the one with the least question marks is Sasha Zverev, who won the French Open, now has won a Grand Slam, made it to the finals of Wimbledon, but he's had kind of a rough go of it on the hard courts in North America.
Let's talk women then, too, because Sabalenka is favored to win right now, to take the whole thing for the women. That would be her, I believe, third U.S. Open title in a row if she were to take it. She, though, has not won a big tournament in a couple of months. There are 3 other women who could take her number 1 ranking if she doesn't win the Open. What are your expectations in looking at the ladies' field?
I think it is very open, just like you said. Sabalenka had a great start to the year, made the finals of the Australian Open, swept the Sunshine Double, which is Indian Wells and Miami. But she hasn't won any tournaments since then. So she's a formidable force here. She can come alive. But if she doesn't, that really opens the door to several other players. Coco Gauff, I would say, leads the way right now. She's playing the best tennis of the last few weeks.
Speaking of big stars, what do you make of Serena and Venus now entering the doubles tournament? How do we expect them to do on this home turf at the Open?
It was just the greatest thing to see Serena back and walking onto Arthur Ashe the other day, especially playing with Alcaraz. There's just like a certain kind of noise this stadium makes when Serena walks onto the court. I hadn't heard it in 4 years. I really missed it. Hearing it again was terrific. When Serena's on the court, it's pretty hard to bet against her. Venus did great in doubles here last year, and Serena's still hitting serves at 125 miles per hour. It's going to be an amazing spectacle no matter what happens, and yeah, I expect Serena to still be one of the great doubles players in the world when she walks out there with her sister.
Okay, so all the names that we have talked about so far have been people that we know of, that are household names. But are there kind of newcomers, rising stars, Matt, that we should be watching, names that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, 100%. I would start on the women's side with Ayatollah, who is already at 21 the greatest player the Philippines has ever produced. She has become, I would say, behind Coco, maybe the second biggest star in women's tennis right now, because the Philippines are such a big country and there is a Filipino diaspora everywhere in big cities where tennis is played for the most part, and especially in New York. You want to see a scene, try and get a general admission seat or any seat when Ayatollah is playing this week at the U.S. Open. On the men's side, there's a kid from Spain named Rafael Hodar, who was at the University of Virginia, just starting classes at the University of Virginia a year ago at this time. He's not starting classes anymore. He's the world number 14, I think, or 13.
Imagine.
He has shot up the rankings. He's going deep at just about every tournament. He's a tennis player from Spain with the name Rafael. There's a pretty good history of guys like that.
Who raises the trophies this year? Your predictions, Matthew?
From what I have seen this summer so far, Coco Gauff, like I said, is playing the best tennis right now. For me, she's the favorite. She's in a tough part of the draw. She's going to have to navigate probably against some pretty tough opponents. She was a mess last year at this tournament. She'd lost control of the most important shots in the game, her serve and her forehand. Those have just come into form in a big way over the last 3 months, and she was just rolling through opponents in Cincinnati, which is the main lead-up tournament. So I'm going to stick with Coco. In terms of the men, like I said, it's hard for me to predict Carlos Alcaraz when he hasn't played in 4 months and he has that wrist injury. He could very well win it, but if you're going to predict that, then you're sort of banking on something that you haven't seen in a really long time and something that doesn't usually happen.
Matthew Futterman, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, usually I say goodbye here, and I'll see you Monday. But today I am saying another goodbye. Goodbye to Yogi. Many of us have a Yogi. Yogi is my chocolate lab. I'm already getting emotional. And after 15 years almost together, we said goodbye to him yesterday. Yogi was the best boy. I got him months after my dad died. And the first time I saw him take a swim, I was convinced my dad was reincarnated in Yogi's body. They swam the exact same way. He had the type of eyes where he could see right into your soul, and not just my soul, but everybody that knew him. Years later, when I divorced my first husband, he slept on my bed every night, nuzzling me as I cried myself to sleep. He was my dog soulmate. When I met my husband, Whit, Yogi was suspicious, not just of Whit, but of his dogs. Eventually, though, we became a family. And when my 2 human boys came along, Yogi offered himself as a pillow and a protector. And then when I got sick a couple of years ago, Yogi was there every day by my side. He helped me feel safe. Pet owners know this feeling. There is no love more pure than the love of your dog. Yogi was the purest love and the best boy, and I will love him forever. So in honor of Yogi, when you walk in the door tonight, give your buddy a hug. Take them for a longer walk and cherish every moment they are on this earth briefly to show us what true love really is. I love you, Yogi. All right. That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back on Monday with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you Monday.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.